Hi, welcome to Masayuki YouTube channel. Before we start, kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you. Let's start the video. If you haven't watched the previous video, I'll link it in the description box, or you can click here. Tensura Volume 19. Chapter 4. The Gathering of the Giants. Masayuki's Victory. Feldway fell to his knees and coughed up blood. His blood was crimson, staining his pure white robes. It can't be, I'm the one. You're too conceited, Feldway. It's always been that way, but you've always thought you had to be the best in everything you do. That's why you lose sight of the essential. Don't make me puke. I don't need to be told what to do by someone who's a shell of his former self. You're right. That's why I can understand some things. The victor and the vanquished fell silent and stared at each other for a moment. Feldway was the next to move. There will be no next time. Today's defeat will be your last. And with that, he stood up, as if the injury he had just sustained had never happened in the first place. If it weren't for the crimson flowers blooming on his clothing, one would have thought that the attack from Rudra's sword had been an illusion. You're still as stubborn as ever. Well, I'll always win, no matter how many times you come, so be my guest. The two men looked at each other again, and then away. Feldway turned his back on Rudra, and ordered Mai, who had been waiting at a distance, to disappear from the scene with instantaneous movement. Not only the material area, but also the barrier of the royal capital had been destroyed, so it was impossible to prevent his escape. However, it was a good decision not to pursue him. Even though he was wounded, Feldway still had a lot of power left. Although he had been mentally cornered by the defeat from Rudra, his fighting ability was still sufficient. If it had not been for the defeat of the invincible castle guard, he would not have chosen to flee so easily. Feldway swore revenge on Rudra, never forgetting today's humiliation. Now then, as for the victorious Rudra. Great job, Rudra. Rudra's face was pressed against Velgren's chest, and he seemed to be in no mood to complain. No, upon a closer look, it was something else. He was blushing, and his eyes were spinning. It wasn't Rudra anymore, he was back to Masayuki again. He had used up all his soul power when he had unleashed the Nova Break, and it had become difficult for him to maintain his Rudra persona. That was the reason why he had missed Feldway. Rather, until Feldway's departure, Rudra's personality had only been maintained through sheer force of will. Hinata walked up to Masayuki, who had been released from Valgrand. It's nice to meet you, First Sama. My name is Hinata Sakaguchi. Before you leave, I wanted to say a few words. In the middle of Hinata's greeting, the noise of the people began to be heard. Seeing how strong Rudra was, they were excited that Masayuki had taken things seriously. It was a misunderstanding, but to those who did not know the situation, it was the truth. When they saw that the battle was over, they came rushing to the area. Once they were within a certain distance, they formed a circle around Masayuki. This was the result of minutes, and the others taking the lead and holding back the people. Wow, Masayuki sounds so cool. I saw it for the first time. The true beacon of light. Yeah. I had no idea what was going on, but I could tell it was awesome. And so, naturally, the credit went to Masayuki. Because Reiner and the others had made the video available, there were many people in the capital who had witnessed the entire thing. No, that wasn't me. No, it was me, but Masayuki's inner thoughts were in turmoil. However, he activated on his it-never-happened skill and succeeded in making a face that seemed to say it was only natural, and so. How on earth did this happen? That was Masayuki's current state of mind. From Masayuki's point of view, Rudra had done everything on his own. Even though he was told that he was amazing, it didn't really feel like it. It was difficult for him to accept such praise without thinking of himself as another person, but the people didn't understand his feelings. Thank you for your hard work. You look great, Masayuki. Vulgrin handed him a jet-black, gold-embroidered emperor's robe, and he put it on while thinking. It was embarrassing to be the center of public attention, but he also had a feeling that there was trouble to come. To be more specific, the knights of the capital had arrived. Wow, this is going to be troublesome. As Masayuki's escort, Minutes was acting as a negotiator. He seemed to be refusing the request, saying that if they wanted an audience with His Majesty the Emperor, they should talk to them first. He listened to the conversation, thinking that his escorts were very reliable, but the content of the conversation was very disturbing. It sounded like the king had been assassinated, but Masayuki had nothing to do with it. Masayuki's heart continued to pound as he heard something about an important witness. He had been through a lot of hardships, and now he was able to accept any difficulties naturally. That's what he had thought, but now he realized that that was an exaggeration. Although he has gotten accustomed to the nervous tension of public appearances, Masayuki was still a bit of a coward. Not to mention, he'd rather not be suspected of murder. I'm sorry. I seem to have gotten you involved in our situation. Hinata, noticing that Rudra had reverted back to Masayuki, softly apologized. Reiner murdered King Ichil, and blamed me for his sins. No way, Masayuki thought. That's such a big deal. It was hard to be involved in such an incident and accept it. But it was also impossible to pretend that he had nothing to do with it now. Even if he wanted to complain, there was no one to complain to. After all, Masayuki was the most important person here right now. Masayuki had no choice but to take charge of the situation. As the crowd continued to cheer, Masayuki took a step forward. Then, as he always did in practice, he tilted his head at an angle and looked down. After a 2-second pause, he turned his head to the front and looked at the audience. Just by doing this, the excitement of the people was palpable. It was frighteningly effective. As expected, it's exactly as Rimuru-san told me. That's right. Masayuki's current gesture was the result of Rimuru's guidance, or rather, it was the result of practice based on Seal's production. By adding the gestures that were calculated to win the hearts of the people, the effect of his skill was increased. And now that it had evolved into the King of Heroes, the effect was enormous. Everyone, please calm down. I need you to stay composed and tell me what happened. When Masayuki quietly began to speak, the excited people fell silent at once. Like a receding wave, the entire area was enveloped in silence. Masayuki was inwardly horrified at the unimaginable impact of his influence. This was the achieved effect after only a small amount of performance guidance. With nothing to do but to laugh at the situation, Masayuki resolved to continue his performance. Okay, don't panic and take your time. Even if you stutter or choke a little, it's fine because there's a way to fix it, wasn't it? Ever since he decided to become emperor, Rimuru had consulted him many times. There were many other people who supported Masayuki, and he was now able to play the role reasonably well. It never occurred to those who were watching him intently that Masayuki was actually really nervous. Everyone. What is right and what is wrong? I think it should be obvious from this scene. If you are wise, you will know the right answer without me saying anything. I ask that you believe in that answer, and I want to believe in you too. Masayuki didn't think he was explaining himself very well. Nevertheless, he was convinced that it would have a significant effect. Because that was the effect of Masayuki's King of Heroes. He didn't know what the right answer was, but at the least, he wanted to avoid the hostility of the people. It seems that he succeeded in doing so, and decided to take this opportunity to lead the people in a cynical manner so as not to be taken advantage of. It's perfect. I didn't say anything important, so I can't be blamed if I'm wrong. Masayuki praised himself inwardly. As Masayuki began to speak, the crowd that had been in an uproar suddenly calmed down. Along with that, Minas came up to Masayuki with a knight in tow. He was a large man with a stern face and metal armor all over his body. Masayuki was scared. However, the knight saluted Masayuki with the highest of respect. It is my great pleasure to have an audience with His Majesty Masayuki, champion of my kingdom of Ingratia and Emperor of the Great Eastern Empire. Ah, yes. Masayuki was overwhelmed and just nodded his head. However, he felt compelled to say what he needed to say and opened his mouth to the knight. King Ichil. He had heard that the King of Ichil was killed, but it wasn't Hinata-san who did it. He was about to continue, but the knight interrupted him and spoke up. Please rest assured. If His Majesty Masayuki is on her side, then the suspicions about Hinata Dono can be cleared. Rather, we, the Knights of Ingratia, would never suspect Hinata Dono. The knight laughed loudly. So then, have we identified the culprit? Hinata glanced at Prince Elric. He had been trembling behind the fountain ever since the battle had started, but Moss had moved him out of the way. It was not a kindness, but an instruction from Tensura. It was an act to secure the culprit, and not to allow him to escape. Seeing such a situation, anyone with an intelligent mind would have been able to guess who was behind this. It may be true that the king was murdered, but was Hinata really the culprit? These were the questions that came to the people's minds. Prince Elric was certainly a popular man, but it was only by looking at the sequence of events that the full picture of what had happened became clear. Masayuki knew nothing about the incident, but Hinata had been looking at Prince Elric. At that moment, he looked up, and she met Elric's eyes. Fufu ha 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 ha, it's all over now, I'm ruined. Elric suddenly started laughing as Masayuki looked at him. And then, for some reason, he took the liberty of confessing his misdeeds. No, what? I don't understand the situation, but what's going on? It was just that Elric misunderstood that he had seen through everything and self-destructed on his own. Unbeknownst to Masayuki, he decided to hide his inner turmoil and continue acting as if he understood everything. And so, the situation came to an end with a furious turn of events. It seems that Masayuki-sama has identified the culprit and solved the problem. Prince Elric killed His Majesty the King, his father. The mastermind behind it was Reiner, the former commander of the Night Order. That's why Hinata-sama. Reiner was the bastard who blundered at the council meeting, wasn't he? Oh, how shameful of the former commander of the Knights of Ingratia. So, then he was trying to take revenge on Hinata-sama with the help of a monster. But it was our Masayuki-sama who saw through that and resolved Hinata-sama's dilemma. As expected of Hiro-sama. Even though he became the emperor of the Eastern Empire, he still remembered us. The prince's confession was decisive. The people were convinced without needing any explanation from Masayuki or Hinata. Hey, Masayuki-sama. Glory to our Masayuki-sama. Such cheers naturally arose. It quickly spread among the people, and the chorus began. Ma-sa-yu-ki. 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 And it wasn't long before the royal capital was filled with the usual cheers. With one hand raised awkwardly, and his cheek twitching, Masayuki responded to the people. The contrast between Hinata's slightly dumbfounded expression and Velgren's satisfied look was striking. Masayuki's inner self was filled with tears and screamed whatever, I don't care anymore, but that's just the way things always were. Incidentally, the next day, Masayuki suffered terrible pains from the after effects of harboring Rudra, as well as from a variety of other reasons, regardless of the use of restoration magic. This included a very rare kind of growing pain called soul pain, but he had no way of knowing that now. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy it.